So we've just come aboard HMS Dauntless, Type 45 destroyer, coming through the flight deck, and we're now going to walk through the ship to the bridge to see what's happening in this exercise Sharpshooter. What we know so far is that they're training to shoot down drones, shoot down swarms of drones, and this is a rehearsal for a very realistic situation. In fact, it's based entirely on what British warships destroyers have already faced in the Red Sea when they were defending shipping lanes from Houthi attacks.
The ship is at action.
So in this scenario, the crew of HMS Dauntless now very much at action stations. We can hear over the radios there are drones in their scenario, surveillance and attack drones in the sky circling the ship. We're about to see how they respond.
Side only. Upper deck is red on port side only.
Continues to close, red 100.
Continues to close, now at red 100, tracking right to left.
So just to be clear, you are training to come under attack.
Yeah, every RN ship trains to come under attack. It's part of what we call our force generation pathway. Before we go on deployment, we spend about 6 months in really busy training exercises. The difference between normal training exercise and Sharpshooter is this is live fire against uncrewed assets, which means that we can be really dynamic and we can respond to threats in the same way as we would do for real life operations.
Red 90, stops in the water.
Contact bears green 100, tracking left to right.
The ops room detected a raid building to the south of the force, heading towards what we were defending a platform that was belonging to friendly forces. That raid built up from the south and started tracking towards the unit. There was also an air raid building to the north. We managed to launch our helicopter to deal with the northern threat, and the ship focused on the southern threat, and we went through the layered defence exercise. This is based on some of the experiences that have been going on in the Red Sea. We've tried to mirror it as much as we possibly could, especially in the air domain, but as we've seen a growing predominance of surface vessels in the Ukrainian conflict, it makes sense to train against both uncrewed surface and aerial targets simultaneously.
Well, the reason we're training today, seeing the capabilities of this Type 45 destroyer, is because we want this crew to be ready to defend the carrier on its future deployment. We're deploying the carrier task force to the Indo-Pacific later this year, and what we need to make sure is that every single ship that's deployed is ready and able to defend itself against any threat that may be presented to it, which includes drones, uncrewed surface ships, aircraft, whatever it may be, and that's why this crew is training so hard here today. If you look at HMS Diamond last year that encountered Houthi attacks in the Red Sea, we know that there is a risk there. That's why precisely that we've invested in capabilities, invested in the crew to make sure that when these ships sail through the Red Sea on any deployment to the Indo-Pacific and in any context anywhere else in the world, they're ready to be able to defend themselves, to defend the ships alongside, to defend the United Kingdom. That's why we train so hard, so when it comes to it, we're combat ready.
Why are we sending a carrier strike group to the Pacific? I mean, it's clear to many people in Britain that the threat at the moment is from Russia in Ukraine and from Russia in Europe. Why are we sending a carrier strike group around the world?
Well, the threats we're seeing are global threats. The security of Europe and the Indo-Pacific are indivisible. You only need to look at North Korean troops fighting on the border of Eastern Europe for Russia against Ukraine to see how they're interconnected. The Indo-Pacific is an incredibly important region for trade, and the deployment of a carrier strike group, an international by design carrier strike groups in the Pacific, reinforces the United Kingdom's global role, but also role supporting our allies wherever they may be around the world in these more difficult times.
And is supporting allies becoming more or less important?
Oh, it's incredibly important. We know that we're seeing increased threats facing the United Kingdom, facing our NATO allies, facing our allies right around the world. That's why, as a government, we're investing more in defence, while we're increasing defence spending to 2.5% of GDP by April 2027. And that means investing in not just our people, but the capabilities.
But no one seems to know what you're spending it on. The Labour government hasn't yet made a decision. When are you going to tell us? Is the Navy going to get bigger? Is the Army going to get bigger? Where's all this money going?
Well, the reason that the Prime Minister commissioned the Strategic Defence Review within 2 weeks of taking office last year is because we value our national security. We know that we're facing more severe threats. That's why Lord George Robertson has been undertaking this externally led review. It will report shortly. It's in an advanced state at the moment that will set out clearly the threats that we're facing and our response to it. But as the Minister for the Armed Forces, I want to see more investment in our people, more investment in our kit and capabilities, learning the lessons that we're seeing from our friends in Ukraine to make sure that any forces that we deploy in Europe or anywhere around the world have the capabilities they need to deter any aggression and defeat any aggressor if necessary.
Which country poses the greatest threat to the Carrier Strike Group?
And so we're training effectively for a threat against Russia. Russia remains the clearest adversary to the United Kingdom, but as part of this we need to be ready that there are threats not just from state actors but from non-state actors as well. So we know there's a threat from the Houthis in the Red Sea. We've seen last year that they engaged a Royal Navy ship, a Type 45 destroyer very much like this one, and we've seen that in that engagement the Type 45 absolutely was able to meet that threat and emerged unscathed. It's precisely that type of experience the reason we train this crew so hard to be ready for any of those threats in the future.
While we've been on HMS Dauntless, the ship has gone up to action stations, she's come down from action stations to a lower state of readiness, and what we've seen is the crew train for coming under attack with both surface drones and aerial drones. There was a Wildcat helicopter that scrambled, fired a Martlet missile and shot down one of those Banshee drones, and it was a whole range of guns that we saw on the ship, ranging from its 4.5-inch cannon which fired a warning shot through to the 50 cals mounted on the bows, a 30mm cannon, and indeed a Phalanx automated, so radar controlled Gatling gun, which ultimately, the Gatling gun which we saw destroy and indeed set on fire the surface drone. And that surface drone, whilst a lot of this exercise is really clearly geared towards protecting this ship and the Carrier Strike Group that it is going to protect when they sail round the world to the Pacific later this year. Of course, drones like that surface drone have become an integral part of the war in the Black Sea, and it's drones like that Ukraine has used to spectacular effect to force Russia's Black Sea fleet to retreat to the eastern edge of the Black Sea. But of course, if Ukraine can use them, then so can Ukraine's enemies, so can Russia, so potentially can Iran and the Iranian-backed Houthi rebels, who will clearly pose a threat to this ship and the ships that this destroyer will be protecting when it sails through the Red Sea and through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait into the Gulf. And it's this ship, this air defence destroyer, that will play such an integral role in protecting that formidable strike group, including the aircraft carrier HMS Prince of Wales.